Happy Sunday. This is Dallas Swanson with Bloody Elbow, joined, it seems, as always lately by Zane Simon. Zane, hi.
Yo,
Can I unveil the minor news, personal news of the day that we just talked about you?
what did
Your
you watch?
special.
The Old Boy remake?
No, although that is quite significant, you know, the historical significance in your life of
Yeah.
today.
Sure, whatever.
All right, well, happy birthday. It's Zane's birthday.
All right. Well, thank
Maybe
you.
I should have cleared that before. I didn't want to just say it and thinking I was being generous and then.
No, no, no. I mean, I realize that plaques are made on the day of my birth, and somewhere right now a parade is being formed. But I don't want people to think that I'm really like full of. I want people to be able to celebrate my birthday in their own way,
All
and
right.
so.
Well,
You
I
know,
encourage all of our viewers to do just that.
yeah.
I
So
really will
it's
so.
all right for you to throw it out there, but let's not make too big of a deal of it.
All right. Happy birthday, though.
Thank you.
12 is a great age to
It is,
finally mature.
I feel like I my whole life's ahead of me. I feel so young and fresh, and it's lovely to be young again.
Okay, so awkward intro
Yeah.
aside, we're here for the sixth round, which is just a quick overview with our general thoughts and our take on the vibe of typically one event, but this weekend it was two. This is both Ultimate Fight Night 43 slash New Zealand slash Huna versus Marquart, along with the San Antonio slash 44 slash Swanson versus Stevens card.
Yeah.
Why don't you just, maybe not relative or specific to one event, just the overall weekend of events. General thoughts. What'd you think?
General thoughts. I feel like I would have. I don't know. I feel kind of like I got done dirty by the New Zealand card in that if I'd been watching it live, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. Like it wasn't a bad card of bad fights at all, but there was no way I was going to be up at like 3 in the morning watching it. It wasn't like there was nothing to watch on it from a pure numbers standpoint, but watching the card is like, hey, these are pretty good, strong, competitive, fun fights, and I feel like I'm just kind of skimming it now in replay and not, getting as much enjoyment as I would have if I'd been able to sit down and watch it. Whereas on the other hand, the Swanson Stevens card kind of tended to drag all the way up until the end, and then that last fight really kind of made it all worthwhile.
So, if I understand you correctly, maybe the Tahuna Marquardt card would have been better live, and Swanson versus Stevens would have been nice to have the luxury of a fast forward here and there.
Yeah, pretty much.
I actually was pleasantly surprised with the overall Tahuna Marquardt card.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this before we started. One thing that I think made me or helped me to enjoy it more was the luxury of watching it at my leisure. I mean, I woke up and watched the main card. For some reason, I like waking up and watching fights. And as we talked about before, maybe a Saturday night event that's fairly hyped or worth watching sometimes kind of becomes the whole centerpiece or cornerstone of your weekend, if not at least your Saturday night. And so naturally your expectations get a little higher. Whereas when you watch them in the morning, you kind of think if these are bad fights, I'm not doing any worse than I was before. So for whatever that's worth, but I watched the main card of Tahuna Marquardt yesterday morning and finished watching the prelims this morning. Um, I actually kind of enjoyed the whole card. I
Yeah.
was I was excited for the main card more so for 43 versus Swanson Stevens or 44, but
Mhm.
actually the undercard turned out to be pretty good. There were some surprises on the Marquardt to Huna card.
Yeah.
So let's go piece by piece. What did you think of that, the preliminary card for Tahuna versus Marquardt? Because I had a couple in there that I really enjoyed actually.
Oh yeah, no, it had some great fights. I mean, you got a lot of stoppages, only two decisions, and even, at least one of the decisions was a pretty hot contest in Valante O'Connell, in that like it was back and forth all the way through, and I'll say this about O'Connell. Like, I was really kind of, I've never been high on the guy at all from a technical standpoint, but he really is showing, if nothing else, that he's willing to be tough and to just work constantly and force other fighters into bad, ugly fights that make them look worse for it. I mean, it's all just slugging it out in the pocket, and that at least makes him fun to watch. I wouldn't act. I was more. I'd be more interested in watching O'Connell's next fight at this point than Valante's.
I actually agree entirely, and I was going to actually bring that up because O'Connell isn't, he doesn't have big explosive weapons. He doesn't really have anything of particular note as, compared to a lot of
Yeah.
the other popular fighters or fighters we talk about. But I always try to be fair and think, okay, well, if you're this guy and you don't have those weapons, how are you going to compensate for it? And I think he did an excellent job of that. And even though Valante won that fight, I was again a little disappointed in him. Um,
Yeah.
no movement whatsoever. It was obvious O'Connell wanted him right in the phone booth, toe to toe, and to slug it out. In Valante, he ended up doing that, but I don't think he was really forced into it. No movement. And then if you're going to sit there and slug it out with the guy, it was kind of ballsy, and I respect that, but no straight punches. And he's actually a pretty good boxer. He was alternating his left and right hands as hooks to try to blast through his guard, and I think you got to mix that up a little bit, rather than I don't want to. I don't think it's rocket science to say you shouldn't stand in front of a guy and just bomb off like
Yeah.
6 consecutive right-left hooks, same thing over and over, and expect a whole lot of it. So I was a little bit disappointed with him and thought he ended up playing O'Connell's game, and there were many options for him to avoid doing so.
Yeah, and I'm not at all convinced he won that fight either.
I'm really not
Honestly.
either.
Yeah. I even like not even when he did better in the third round, which was by far his best round, he ended up getting dropped right at the end of it. So there's no part of me that really. I would have been probably a lot happier with O'Connell getting the split. It was just an ugly fight all around. I mean, like I said, it wasn't boring, but it was not. It was dirty. It was an ugly fight, kind of a mess, and I thought O'Connell definitely got the better of it all the way through.
And I think you and I are maybe in agreement on this in that Volante had a little bit of a better reputation, more exposure, and because he, for all intents and purposes, kind of just ended up even or not a very clear and definitive winner, that actually raised O'Connell's stock. I don't know about the
Yeah.
general populace, but for
No,
me,
it did.
in good.
Absolutely. I mean, for me being down on O'Connell, seeing him, really come out and draw even with somebody like Volante makes me think that he can actually stick around for a few more fights.
Yeah, I'd say the best way to compensate if you don't have outrageous offensive skills is just with heart in willpower, and to me that defined exactly what O'Connell did. If you're ready to move on, I actually
Oh yeah.
loved this next one. Did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, no, no.
Ian Entwistle versus Daniel Hooker. And, I didn't know a lot about either, but I was intrigued from the way you described Entwistle as coming out and, throwing a flying something submission all the time. So I
Yeah.
actually got really interested, and for some reason, I don't know, I love the way that this fight unfolded. It reminded me of a very old school match. Basically, what it reminded me of was Tito Ortiz telling Ken Shamrock, go ahead and go for a leg lock all you want because I'm going to punch you in the face every time you do. And that was kind of the story of the whole fight. Was it just me, or did you like this one too?
Oh no, it was a real fun fight. I mean, Whistle did what he's gonna do, and unfortunately for him, with that kind of game plan, like sometimes it works out brilliantly, and you lock up an instant submission, and the guy taps out, and you get out of there with a minute's worth of work and a big paycheck. And sometimes you get blasted, and for a guy like him who has no real striking defense, he's got a little bit of pop in his hands, which will help him down the road, but who's only really looking to submit somebody, that's the price you pay. I mean, that's the game.
He was obviously walking right on that danger zone. But a couple of things were impressive. The way he triangled his legs to try to straighten out that leg and make more
Hmm.
space and just keep Hooker off him. And then there was a time, I think the commentary booth, Florian maybe picked up on it. There was a time when I thought when Hooker was trying to hand fight, and I think it was after Entwistle triangled his legs, he isolated Hooker's arm, and he looked to be looking to swing his leg over for an armbar, which really would have been
Yeah.
brilliant. So all that is good, but I think after he transitioned to the armbar, didn't get it, and then went back into kind of like that modified 50-50 guard, and then kept
Hmm.
persisting. I think at that point is when you gotta call it, at least relent on that one single move you've been after that long.
Yeah.
Uh, in Hooker, I thought, I mean, I don't know how you can not love a performance like that because it was also technical. He was really, at first, he was almost too calm. I was like, man, especially when he went into that inside heel hook, I'm like, this is time to be urgent. But in retrospect, I respect how composed he stayed, and obviously when he started banging those elbows off. Even though Entwistle lost, I'm very intrigued by him, and I'm looking forward to seeing him again. And the same with Hooker; he got the win, gutted it out. So this was a really pleasant surprise for me. These are two guys that I'm glad are in the UFC, and I'm looking forward to see more of.
Yeah, I mean, Hooker's definitely, he showed that he can keep to a solid game plan when he knows what's coming. And I mean, that sounds simple. It's like, oh, well, I know what he's going to do, so I should be prepared for that. But you see it all the time that fighters aren't. And so, especially somebody as young and relatively inexperienced as he is, being able to take on a guy who's just going to come out and look for really dangerous submissions and stay calm and fight him off and get the stoppage is promising for him and for his future. So yeah, I was pretty excited by that.
You know, I guess regardless of the fact that I enjoyed the fight and the way it played out, I liked both of these prospects because to me it was obvious that they had skill, and that doesn't
Yeah.
mean everywhere they were dynamic, but there was a level of technique on display, and obviously they both had finishing prowess and heart and gameness and all that, and that's really what I want to see in a prospect. I don't want to see amazing things, but I think that they were excellent examples of prospects that I would like to see more of in the UFC. I don't know if you want to go through these next ones individually, but the remaining ones on the undercard are Magny de Lima. That might
Yeah.
warrant a separate conversation, just because it was a good fight, total
Yeah.
opposite. First round, all de Lima, really feisty and slippery grappling defense by Magny, and then he came out in the second and just put it on him. Finished it with strikes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing was is that Magny, I mean, hopefully he learned a really important developmental lesson from this fight, which is that, you're not always going to be, even as you get way better, you're not always going to be better everywhere than your opponent. Because, I mean, he clearly, he went out and said, okay, I'm going to take this guy down and beat him up. And DeLima was just worlds better than him on the floor. Like, and DeLima, the big thing about him is he's strong. He's really a strong dude. He's got a lot of power, a lot of grappling power. And so Magny got him down, and DeLima just hit that nice little sweep and was on top of him from there on out. And almost, I mean, Magny very much got saved by the bell in that. That
That's right.
triangle was locked in. But
And that was
and the
a
thing
nice
is,
group of transitions too.
yeah. So to me, it was really nice to see Magny then second round realize, okay, stupid plan. I'm way better than this guy at kickboxing, like way, way better, and just put it on him for a round and knock him out. Like Magny is a skilled kickboxer for the UFC. He really is. And there was no reason for him to do anything else.
When he was on the Ultimate Fighter, I liked his technique, and he showed shades of everything he's showing now, but he didn't seem to have a ton of. His punches were quick and they had some snap on them, but they didn't seem to be jarring or punches that were really going to have a big offensive impact. And to me, that's been really key for him. I think he's improved a little bit everywhere, but the fact that he's really throwing his punches with some sting and doing so in a way where he can still react and defend takedowns in many or most cases, that's pretty big for him. So I think Magny's doing all the right things right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing he did really since his, time in the UFC is he stepped up his punching output or his kickboxing output in general. He just became a much more aggressive striker because he's had the technique. He moves well, his defense is good, keeps his hands in the right position and parries well. But he a lot for early on when he dropped a couple fights, a lot of the problem was he was just waiting on the outside, looking for his own opportunities, and now he's out there making opportunities, and that's been a huge difference in his striking.
Yeah, and I agree, and I've been somewhat critical of some of the UFC's matchmaking, and to me, this one, even though it was a fairly poisonous matchup for Magny, I actually kind of like this one because, De Lima's definitely talented, but I wouldn't put him on the level as Sergio Moraes. So
No.
to me, this was a fair way for Magny to kind of dip his toes into, the kind of waters that we all know he's going to have trouble swimming in, and for him to pass it this strongly, and yeah, so I like this. I like this matchup. I think that was a fair way for Magny to prove himself without dooming him to a really horrendous matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a little bad for Dillian because the truth is he doesn't have a takedown game, and this showed it pretty clearly in the second round when Magny wasn't going to dive into his guard. There was, he didn't have any way to get him down. So I feel a little bad for Delima, but hopefully he can bounce back from it and work on his takedowns.
I would think he would come back because that first round he dominated. I would have scored that
Yeah,
a 10-8. And
yeah,
like I mentioned before, not only was he talented in submissions, but the way he chained everything together. If he wasn't going from one submission to another, he was improving position. So I think that warrants a trip back. I hope he gets one. Grujic and Indic. Any
nothing to say
thoughts on?
here.
I
No.
mean, good performance. Not
Yeah,
that it was bad, but I mean, so what was it? The end of the first
end of
round.
the first round, Grujic knocked Indic out. Indic isn't really ready for the UFC. That's all it really comes down to,
Uh,
honestly.
Roldan Sengchaan and Richie Vasilich or Vasulik. Wasn't a
Uh,
bad fight.
it wasn't a bad fight. It was back and forth. I mean, the big thing for me, what I saw out of Song Cha-an is that he was the more technical fighter out there, but he has a really bad habit of giving up position for submission, and that lost him the fight. I mean, he ended up dropping rounds because he would jump on a guillotine or, go for a submission out of, I think even out of mount at one point, and get swept, and then he'd end up on the bottom for the rest of the round.
And
And
do you think the way fans often judge, because obviously fans would rather, at least that's what they say, they would rather see a fighter take chances, go after and pursue risks to try to finish and lose than to fight conservatively and win. To me, that was kind of a big, I mean, I don't know if people will even acknowledge that, but that's what he did. He was risky. There are times when he could have maintained position and clocked more time winning the fight, but he didn't. He went after something, it didn't work, and he ended up, I agree with you, losing the fight because of it.
yeah, I mean, like to me, it's always a thing of like there's part of it where it's like, yeah, I want to see guys go for it, and I mean, I'm happy to watch that kind of fight. It's exciting, but if you don't get it, then like that can't just be a zero. Like that can't be like at no cost. It's like, oh, I go for it, and if I don't get it, everybody respects that I went for it, and therefore I'm still winning. It's like, well, you gotta still, you gotta get it sooner or later. If you just never get the submission, then you're just costing yourself, and that has to be, you have to see that part of it too.
How about Deshaun Johnson versus Jake Matthews? I thought it
I
was
was
okay. Go ahead.
I I was gonna say I was a little disappointed in that it seems like Deshaun Johnson might be kind of a dirty fighter.
Because there were like five blatant both, actually there weren't that many. There was a barrage of 5 or 6 elbows, and most of them were either 12-6 or directly and obviously to the back of the head.
There was that. There was a really bad cage grab to stop a takedown,
Right after
and
that.
then at the end of the fight, Matthews claimed that Johnson bit him.
Oh, I didn't. Where did you hear that?
It was on on the broadcast right after the fight. He walked over to the ref and to his corner, and he started pointing to his arm, and he's like going like this. He's like, "You bit me. Bit me. You can see the marks." And that might be like the Ronda Rousey Liz Carmouche thing where he had because he was going for a whole bunch of rear naked chokes, and if he got one right across the mouth guard and was pushing in, then it's not hard to press somebody's own teeth into your arm. So there might, but in a fight where Johnson's already getting a point taken for illegal elbows and grabbing the fence and stuff like that, it's certainly not a good look.
All right, so some on-the-fly forensics here. This is probably total horseshit. In fact, I can almost guarantee it is. But
Hmm.
wouldn't you want to look for marks with the bottom row of teeth? Because in the both, whether intentional or unintentional, the situation you described with the choke, that would put the mouthpiece, the impression would be on the mouthpiece. But I can't think of any situation where if there were bite marks from the lower jaw, the lower set of teeth, that, I don't see any way that that could be accidental. Sherlock Holmes shit? What do you think?
Yeah, well, that might be true. I really would not I don't have the data set of having put 500 rear naked chokes on 500 people wearing mouthpieces going across the mouth. I can tell you that the bite marks, no, I don't know.
So you're
Like
unprepared for the show today. That's what you're saying?
I am unprepared for the show today. I really did not do my homework at all.
So I didn't know about the bite thing, but the elbows to the head, and then just the fact that the fence grab was right after that. Obviously, regardless of intent or whatever, if that happens, people are going to start wondering. But then the bite on top of that, I mean, yeah, I mean that's going to be the indication of what could be, a poor reputation forming. But from a
Yeah.
technical standpoint, I was really surprised that Deshaun didn't really move that much. I mean, if you want to avoid a guy's clinch, you can't just back up in a straight line until your back hits the fence and cover up. That was
That's a
odd to me.
that's a product of him fighting nothing but cans. That's what
Yeah.
that is. That's and he was a former pro boxer. Um and that his fighting in on the regional circuit, it was that explode thing. You read or probably knew about that. And when you fight competition that's that bad, then there's no expectation that you're putting yourself in a bad position against much better fighters. And that's what you saw a lot was him really wildly overreaching on punches, him backing up in straight lines, not moving well. And when you got to the ground, it was just Matthews, went from dominant position to dominant position to dominant position and landed hard shots and had no trouble mounting a ton of offense.
I don't want to pick on Goldberg, but it was odd to me that he made it a point to mention that Johnson's elbows were, he either said unintentional or clearly unintentional. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. I know that's always hard to weigh, but
Well,
he landed a whole series of them. I mean,
I don't know how heavily the UFC leans on their commentators. I
yeah,
don't, or it's hard to say because some you might talk to them and they'd be like, you know what, I don't hear anything from them about what I have to say or don't say. I know how to do my job and I do my job right. You never know. That could be the response, but it is basically seems to be a UFC talking point that no foul is ever intentional. Like and at some point, we've all seen some shit where it's like, okay, look, either that's intentional or the guy's so bad that he has no idea what he's doing out there.
yeah. So inside low kicks, headbutts, things like that, to me, are rarely intentional. But when
Yeah,
you have a guy who's perfectly cogent and he's got the back of the guy's head right in front of him, and he winds up, and it's not one, and it's not like Matthews was moving his head around. I mean, his head was
yeah,
still right there, and on top of that, it wasn't just back of the head or 12-6. It was borderline both of them. So I
yeah,
guess what I'm saying is, if there was ever a reason to say there's a good chance that could have been intentional, I thought that was it right there.
yeah. Stuff like that. Stuff like, I mean, knees to the head of a downed opponent. When you see that, and when a guy's on his knees and the guy knees him, that's almost always heat of the it may not be something the fighter was would do just casually, but it's heat of the moment stuff where they can, they just see the guy's head in front of them and are like, well, I'll knee him, and I mean, it's still intent. That's still with intent. They didn't not mean to knee him in the head.
Yeah, because one of the last things you're doing in a split-second decision is pulling back on what could be an effective strike to check and see if he's grounded or if any
Or
of
to
his.
even think about what the rules are. To think about, oh, I shouldn't knee him here because he's grounded. You see, well, he's down, he's vulnerable. I'll knee him. Like that kind of stuff. Like there's definitely a whole nomenclature problem with calling everything unintentional.
Yeah, I agree, and it's tough to gauge intent, but when it's always insinuated that it's perfectly unintentional is just why I started to
Yeah.
go down that pathway. So, onto the main card, Whitaker Rhodes. Any thoughts there? I thought it was a good, not amazing, but a pretty decent performance from Whitaker.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel a little personal disappointment in like I was talking with Wyman about this because Rhodes is one of his big hot prospects that he's really high on, and we're both kind of the opinion now that like Rhodes is a great example of why you don't necessarily take the first call from the UFC for an opportunity to go to the big show, basically. Because he is obviously a developing talent. He's a great athlete. He's got some great striking skill. He went out there with Whitaker, who has developed a lot and gotten a lot better, and was really competitive. Almost even for 2 rounds. Like the first 2 rounds of that fight were really close. And Rhodes is really competitive, but it's also obvious that Rhodes just he's not ready for this level of competition. He's not ready for these kind of fights. He doesn't have the confidence in his strikes, and he doesn't have quite the gas tank and the technical training. And the first time he had to cut a bunch of weight, and this time he had to fly around the world. And so it's a little disappointing to see a guy who's a pretty hot prospect kind of drop his first 2 UFC fights via close, but not, you know, but pretty clear decisions.
Were you impressed with Whitaker's volume, his
Yeah,
offensive output a little more?
Whitaker really looks like he's turned a good corner. Not only is his output way up, but his kicking game is suddenly there. And
Which is big
seriously,
for
like,
him, I think.
yeah, with his takedown defense, a kicking game and higher volume is basically all he needs to be a pretty complete fighter. Like,
Yeah,
that's it.
I would agree because he's got more range than with his hands, and but yeah, he's another guy kind of like Magny that I think he's doing all the right things, and he's a young cat. So
Yep.
yeah, solid performance from him. I thought this was maybe one of the best fight of this card, and this is the one I was looking forward to the most. It didn't disappoint, but the outcome itself fucking shocked me, to be honest.
Yeah.
Hioki, Charles Oliveira.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt for you when that happened. It was like that disturbance in the forest. A million voices just cried out and were silenced.
Actually, I was okay with it, really, even though I like Hioki. At least totally could have been a product of Oliveira's aggressiveness.
Yeah.
Hioki's been criticized for being complacent, but when his opponent is doing all the aggressive work or making the fight happen, he does phenomenal because
Yeah.
he's an excellent reactive fighter. I thought it was a great fight. I enjoyed it. I
Yep.
didn't think Hioki looked terrible, but
No.
I could not believe that Oliveira submitted him. And it's ballsy. In a couple revelations, Hioki's been awesome, but sure, that was a reminder. Well, he really has been awesome on the overseas platform. And
Yep.
I always don't want to be the guy who says, anything negative about that. But just overall, regardless of where they're from or where he hadn't fought quite a juggernaut like Charles Oliveira. The other kind of retrospective feeling I had was when Oliveira was way too complacent on the Miller knee bar.
Mhm.
I think it might have been because he's that good on the ground and he
Yeah.
knew it, and we might not have known then. Sure, he's still underrated Miller, made a mistake, didn't react too quickly, but now I'm seeing, and that dude is a pimp on the ground. So I think he felt like he could held his own and just learned a hard lesson there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what it really does, honestly, and I mean, and this is another one of those guys that I just kind of feel bad for, is it really reflects well on Andy Ogle, who just
Yeah,
went. deep into, I think it was into the third round against Oliveira, if I'm remembering that correctly.
I don't remember that fight at
Yeah,
all, actually.
halfway through round three until Oliveira tapped him out and was really competitive on the ground with him. And he's one of that's sort of where it reflected for me was like Ogle's one of those fighters that I will remember for being like a lot better than anyone will ever remember him for being. You
He's a
know?
he's a durable little cat. I
Yeah.
actually liked him after the Akira Kurosawa fight, which I
Mhm.
thought he showed a lot of heart and perseverance in. But Hioki's first loss by submission, I
I
would not
know.
I would not have guessed that. But honestly, I wasn't that disappointed because
No, it's a
I,
great fight.
it was an awesome fight, and I don't think it was a case of Hioki underperforming, which definitely
Yeah.
some felt or many felt played into his last fights. To me, this was
Yep.
like a reminder of why everyone was so geeked about Charles Oliveira.
Yeah. No, I mean they went skill for skill and Oliveira won. That was what it was. Nobody looked like they were lagging behind. Nobody looked like they were out of place or didn't know what they were doing. It was just that, I mean, that choke Oliveira hit, that it was a thing of beauty. Like, if somebody hit that, like, I can't even imagine how you defend that at that point. When somebody actually, like, gets their legs wrapped over like that around your head, like, you're done, you
Once he
know?
got his guard like that and sat back, it was like, ooh, how are you going to work your way out of this one?
Yeah.
Um, Weird correlation on this next fight. So Pele and Jared Rosholt.
Oh, God.
Well, let me preface it this way. You remember our conversation before where I was trying to say that I thought Pele would do good in transitions anytime Rosholt couldn't just get him under his girth or stay
Yeah.
on him.
Yeah.
And here's the correlation I was thinking. When Magny fought, both in the first and the second, and he was trying to get away from De Lima, he was risky as hell.
Yeah.
There were times when De Lima had a single or a waist lock, and Magny would actually turn away and risk giving up his
Yep.
back to post an arm and get away. And I remember just observing, like, ooh, that's ballsy. I respect that, but that could have gotten you in a lot of trouble. That is kind of what I expected more of Pelele, but by not taking any of those chances, he basically tried to wrestle with a better wrestler, and that was kind of just my take on it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it was Wyman again who brought up after this fight when I was just like, "What the fuck was Pelele doing out there? I don't get it." And he brought up that I think that Pelele actually was an like a a very good wrestler earlier in his career in Australia, and he was he apparently they're even saying he nearly made the Olympic team for
Oh,
Australia's when
that I didn't
Australia
know.
hosted the games.
That's
So,
impressive.
for a country without a great wrestling pedigree, he was a very good wrestler. Like
Sure.
very good. So it makes a little more sense that he would want to go out there and say, "Okay, well I can wrestle better than you can. I was a great wrestler too." But it's not, still at some point I would have hoped somebody in his corner would have just like before the fight when they were training, somebody in his corner should have pulled him aside and said, "No, you're not.
Or at
Don't
least
do
let's
this."
work on a plan B.
Well, because I mean the thing is that Pelele is a much harder striker, and with that kind of wrestling background, he had a chance to stay upright if he just stayed focused on keeping his center of gravity low and working at range and not trying to out wrestle him. But I think, early he just dove in and said, "Okay, I'm going to out wrestle you. I'm going to take you down, get on top, pound you out." And he exhausted himself doing it.
Yeah, and so
That,
on paper, sorry to interrupt you, but Pelele's a better striker, better submission grappler, and close to or comparably, even though Rocholt's a better wrestler, on paper that really favors him. But he ended up fighting the one singular area where Rosholt was superior and didn't seem to have a backup plan. That's the other thing that
yeah.
kind of, I mean, you got
Yeah.
to do something different at some point.
Well, and I think just after the first 5 minutes of doing it, he was just exhausted. Like, the amount of work he put into those takedowns, where I mean, and that's why I was talking about where you're talking about in transition. That's where you saw Rosholt in transition and how good his scrambling is. When Pelele did have him down, he was right back up.
It
You
was pretty
know, like
impressive, especially for a guy his size.
yeah, like he does not get put in a bad position easily. He's very tricky. He's very good at moving around and at countering and counter wrestling, and that wore Pelele out, trying to chase him down.
I didn't necessarily expect Pele to counter wrestle specifically, but I
Yeah,
just thought he would be more slippery
yeah.
from a defensive standpoint and staying out of his clutches. So, on to the main event: Nate Marquardt versus James Huna.
Holy
Um,
hell! I
yeah,
There were about 30 seconds of this fight that went just the way I thought they would. After Tahuna got taken down, he got hit a couple times hard, and then he got taken down, and he spent some time on bottom, and he finally worked his way back up to the feet, and he just unloaded on Marquardt in the clinch, in close, with some uppercuts. And, then Marquardt went down, and he followed him down, and uh, it was it was unfortunately disappointing. It was a really clear picture of just how one-dimensional James Tahuna is.
I hate to say it, but I got that feeling as well. But on the brighter side, I was super impressed with Marquardt. So, one of the reasons I actually like doing this is when we predict so much beforehand, I always like to go back and revisit and,
Oh yeah,
as a frame of reference, what we thought before. And a big thing for me was Marquardt's range. And I thought, and we'll get to this on the Cubs Stevens fight too, I was really impressed. It's not that he never throws kicks, but I mean, for a while, I think he threw five or
yeah,
six kicks right in a row. And that all of a sudden now he not only had more range, but he was using it effectively. And Tahuna then had to take more time. He had to cut an angle, or his entries were more obvious, and Nate was able to get out of the way. The one time, it's probably the same you're talking about, that Tahuna kind of had him pinned on the cage and started to
hmm
unload. Marquardt got out of there with the quickness, which was smart because
yeah.
that's the worst possible position he could have been in. I was shocked. I didn't expect it to go that smoothly, but it was kind of a reminder. I used to love Nate,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I said this before, but Nate Marquardt on top is perilous. I mean, usually there's a good chance if Nate is on top, he's either going to win the round or finish the fight. And as soon as Nate got on top early like that, I thought, wow, I really misjudged him. Maybe didn't, forgot how skilled and talented he was. And so I kind of liked it, even though it was a pleasant surprise for me. I like Nate. It was a good win for him. He needed it
Oh
badly.
God, yeah, he needed it badly. It was a great win. He came out and he, tangled up with somebody who's a really dangerous power puncher and showed that his chin can survive still. And, he's not just going to go down with the first big shot. And he also, reminded everybody that, and something I think that the commentary brought up too, that actually was a pretty good point, which was that when he was fighting at welterweight, he was often just fighting to conserve energy. And now that he's back up at middleweight, he has a lot more, he's more comfortable. He fights with, like he was meant to be there. It fits his body better and it fits his cardio and conditioning and training better.
Yeah, he can spend his energy on offensive output rather than trying to conserve his energy to last.
Yeah. And as a guy who's big and burly, the fact, like, I looking it up right before the fight, I was like, oh, he's 6 feet tall. For a guy who carries as much muscle as he is at that height, like, welterweight is a hell of a cut. I mean, sure, you can see guys like Brandon Thatch down there who are like 6'2" or something, but they're a rail generally.
That really hit me when I saw in the cage Marquardt square off with Woodley, and I was like, "Holy!" I mean, the size
Yeah,
difference was comical almost.
yeah,
One more quick one before we move on. Tahuna's entrance.
that was
Not,
awesome.
not that just that in particular, I enjoyed it, but why don't we do more of that shit? I mean, that was
Because
what people loved about Pride, and a lot of the UFCs have gotten really stale. And to me, that's a way for fighters to express themselves. Then you would remember you have something to identify. To me, I would like to see maybe not that as elaborate, but I would like to see at least fighters be able to show more personality and not just the standard traditional walkout.
Well, I would love to see fighters be more elaborate, and it's actually one of the few things that I think Fight Pass is good for. Is it without commercial breaks? Because that's one of the big things is they just don't show entrances anymore, almost at all. When you have, I mean, they'll show them on pay-per-view and they show them on Fight Pass, but all the stuff in between, like anything that's on Fox Sports One or anything like that, those entrances are all going to be covered over. And these days too, the announcers talk incessantly over them. So you know, even if a guy does have like a cool walkout song or something planned, you're just going to hear Kenny Florian and Goldberg just talking over it the whole time, saying, "Oh wow, look at how cool this is," and "Oh, did you know that he was born over?" And it's like, shut up and just you got the whole fight to give me all that information.
Some of
But
that I don't mind, but I don't want it all the way through filling every moment of dead space. You
yeah,
know?
and unfortunately the UFC for a long time has had a policy where they told they came out very publicly and we were like, we don't want fighters to do fun things. Like that was their policy. Like if it's culturally relevant, you can do it, but not otherwise. And they've relaxed that a little. I mean, I don't know what's culturally relevant about Tom Watson wearing a gorilla mask. Like
But I liked it, you
I
know?
like it too. And they definitely seem with their Australia shows especially, they seem to let their hair down a little more. I mean, you had like Ben Wall's entrance. I don't know if you remember that with all the big animal masks.
Yeah, yeah. And
And like they've let their hair down a little, but then it just gets down. I think at that point it just gets down to Huna being a pretty cool dude who actually put some thought into that stuff.
I think with as much the UFC has riding on fans or viewers identifying with the fighters, not loving them, just identifying with them, to me that would be a no-brainer. And maybe they could use something to spice up what a lot of people have think have become a stale format. So for whatever reason, I would definitely like to
Yeah,
see some more of that. All right, let's move on to this next one, and if
yeah,
possible, not spend quite as much time on it.
yeah.
Hamilton, Oleanic. What did you? I actually thought it was pretty badass. I mean,
Oh yeah, I was so fucking happy to see Olenek come out and do that. I mean, that was exactly what I predicted he would do, and exactly what I hoped he would do. And to just see it, like that's so much more fun to see it heavyweight than the big guy just out brawl the other big guy.
yeah, and he went Scarfold Kesagatami,
Yep.
which is pretty rare. And I wish I could have. Man, last night, let's see, one of the Gracies was running. I don't think it was Henner. It might have been Hiron Gracie, but he was running the UFC Twitter account, and I fucking loved it all night. Just a positive breath of fresh air, and he was doing on the fly Gracie breakdowns. I
Yeah,
wish I could have read it from that one, but I believe it was not. And these are always semantics, but technically it was it was more of like a modified head and arm choke versus a
yeah.
neck crank. But either way, love to see the scarf hold. It's risky. We saw Ronda get in trouble there, but it was pretty badass for him to come in and pull that
Well, and
out.
he's hit it like 15 times in his career. Like the guy knows how to do that. Like that is his move. And woe be it to. And the thing is that like because it's heavyweight, when these guys get on the ground, a lot of them don't mind giving up like side mount or all these control positions because A, they're not very good grapplers, or B, they think that they can just sort of hulk their way out of it. And so he's kind of got this thing where like he'll fall, he can make people just fall into that choke because they just have no idea. Whereas at a lighter weight class, you're going to get a lot more scrambling and a lot more guys who wouldn't give up that position so easily.
And it was baller how the whole time he had the air that he could and would and was about to do that. And especially
Yeah.
after the win, not a big jump up cartwheels, just like
Yep.
another win under the belt. So another pleasant surprise of the evening. Ray Borg, now we're moving on to the Fox Sports preliminary card. Uh, kind of blown away by this cat again, whatever
Yeah.
the second or third youngest, and the way this dude not only phase shifts from striking to grappling, but the way he can creatively transition from one thing to another on the ground. I mean, I want to say he came out, flash strikes, transitioned into a double leg, teleported to back mount, put
Yeah.
both hooks. I mean, it was a thing of beauty, man. I
No,
loved
the
it.
teleportation is the right word for it. I do not know how he gets like from position to position in grappling. It just feels like he's suddenly like, you're in like he's got underhooks and they're face to face and against the cage, and suddenly he's on your back. Like, I have no idea how he does that, and it's really, I mean, he's the kind of athlete who has top five potential written all over him at flyweight. You know?
Indeed, especially even the way he performed in what I think was only his fifth or sixth fight against
Yeah,
Dustin Ortiz, who was
yeah,
a supremely respectable featherweight, a guy I think is better than many see him as based on his UFC fights. But even based on that performance in a loss, that was obscene potential for him to come
yeah,
out and he almost toyed with Howell. So
yeah.
to me,
No.
this dude is destined for sure for some kind of top 10, top five even.
Now he
I
just
think.
needs to get a better nickname. Like
What's that?
he just needs a better nickname now. He's got like the last name is perfect for 100 different Star Trek based nicknames, and he's coming out with the Taz Mexican Devil. He's got to improve that.
Yeah, and that hankering for Tweaky or for Twinkies, was that some kind of hidden reference I didn't know about?
I
Joe
know, I don't
Joe
think so.
Silva, 50 grand can buy me a lot of Twinkies. I mean, it's a logical thought. I would love 50
Yeah,
grand with Twinkies.
but
Um,
he's got to be like, yeah, we got to get like, resistance is futile, or
yeah, I saw you post that on Twitter last night. That's not a bad one at all.
yeah.
Um, Andy ends Marcelo Guimaraes.
Ugh, ugly fight. I have nothing to say about this fight. It was ugly and terrible and ugly.
Okay, Johnny Bedford and Cody Gibson. A lot of controversy about this one, and we kind of talked a little bit before the show on it. You want to lend your take on this?
Uh, I mean, I feel like Bedford, he has, and this is the thing that somebody else said it too. He has the kind of personality that would make me really dislike him if he were a different kind of fighter. But the fact that he is just such a balls out wrecking machine makes it much more like livable. Because he does have, I mean, he cannot stop himself from the sort of like sour grapes griping after what are two losses that are pretty much on him. I mean, I had no problem with the stoppage in this fight. He got clocked. He went out. He snapped back to it, and the ref stepped in when he came back. And it was a slightly later stoppage than it should have been to look good for the ref. But he still went out, and he was still very clearly all the way out.
I think the big reason people are going to and kind of have a right to complain was the fact that Hatley kind of came in and then second guessed
Yeah,
himself.
yeah,
And I don't really hold that against him. First of all, I have to say that is historically probably the most debated and controversial situation is a flash knockdown. I
yeah,
mean, the list goes on forever. Dodson, Dillashaw, Fedor, Hendo. No matter what, someone's not going to be happy with that.
yeah,
Um, and it's really, I always go back to like the safety first thing. That really is the deal. Someone, I don't remember who, was saying MMA wouldn't exist if it was safety first, and that is 100% the exact opposite. The whole thing that
yeah,
legitimized MMA was making safety a priority. So, and Hatley was not really out of position. I mean, if you think about it, he got clocked on one side and kind of fell back, and
yeah,
so he was there pretty well. And I think it's doesn't make it a great stoppage, but I think it's actually human nature for him to rush over because Bedford, let's be honest, he got shellacked. His entire upper body sank down, head down to the floor. His entire lower body stiffened like a board. He
yeah,
fell back completely flat on his back, and he had both of his arms out and kept both of his arms out by the time Gibson threw that follow-up shot,
yeah.
which didn't miss. But to me, as soon as a fighter gets dropped, he's on his back, and the follow-up shot is going to come through perfectly clean. That warrants a stoppage right there.
Yeah. And I mean, and this does also, to get back or to get into the fight a little bit too, it gets back to what has classically been Bedford's Achilles heel, which is that when he fights guys who are as big and strong as him, the fact that he has this balls out total aggression style leaves him wide open to get caught.
Yeah, and if you're gonna, I mean, I'm rarely one that would comment, but actually, I mean, I don't know what the word is, but I was highly turned off by his post-fight speech. Maybe it
Yeah.
was still adrenaline, heat of the moment, and my heart goes out to him because no matter what,
Yeah.
he had a lot riding. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
disappointing. But to say, this isn't boxing, I'm allowed to grapple, well, that would be a great case if the ref called a TKO via trying to attempt to grapple, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to me, that was all ludicrous. And I thought it was a little harsh that he made it personal by saying Kerry Hatley, the referee, is taking food off my kids' tables. Like, if you're going to go that deep, I think at some point you have to bear some responsibility. And if you don't want to have a controversial stoppage like that at all costs, you should try to avoid getting, punched really hard in the face, going completely limp, and falling flat on your back and not defending yourself. So I don't want to make a big deal about it, but I was just not on board with his whole post-fight
Yeah.
speech
It
there.
it was problematic in a lot of ways and for a lot of reasons. But he's still a fun fighter, so I'll watch him next time he comes out.
Oh yeah, and he had a great start to the fight, and that's
Yeah.
almost what's disappointing is I mean, I'd like that he went out on a shield. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not the kind of guy you can say he fought safely for the win, and I
No.
respect that. And I guess that was kind of evened out by his post-fight demeanor.
Yeah.
So Carlos Diego Ferreira versus Colton Smith. Someone on Twitter said if Smith gets tapped out quick, is he done with? And he got tapped out quickly, and I do think he's maybe done. Isn't that 3 losses in a row?
3 losses in a row. Yeah, he's making he's pretty much the standalone argument for worst tough winner ever at this point, which that kind of sucks.
I'm trying to think of an argument
Travis
counter.
Luter was the other notorious.
That was the comeback though, and he
Yeah, that was
mounted
the
it.
comeback.
He performed pretty well against that. God, I remember those
Yeah,
days. But he was mounted, but Anderson just had knee surgery. But either way, kind
yeah,
of yeah. I mean, it's hard to describe. And really, when Colton won that, I think everyone knew he was getting by in one single dimension. He was really
yeah,
good at it. And I think he made it a point to talk about how he's been training striking and transitions in
yeah.
BJJ, which is smart. I think he's doing the right things, but he maybe just did them a little too late.
Well, and,
Um,
and the truth is too, like I kind of brought this up during the fight and before it that like Ferreira, and Smith had grappled before on the regional circuit, so it's very likely too that Ferreira just totally had his number, just knew exactly what to expect out of him.
Super, super impressive from him. So here's the thing. I mean, that was what I would just call a no hooks rear naked choke or a
Yeah.
modified. Do you to me that's I mean I'm impressed. I think that was sweet, but to me that really shows more of Colton's lack of technique and knowledge to know how to. I mean, there's a reason
Well,
you're
I
supposed
mean,
to have two
you
hooks
know,
in a choke.
Ferreira had his leg hooked. He had one leg hooked around from the side around Colton, so Colton couldn't spin out, like around Colton's in between his legs. So that Colton couldn't spin out easily. And I think it's very possible and likely too that Ferreira is just a serious prospect, and he probably has a really serious squeeze. You know,
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, like that thing was locked in, and it was the moment it was locked in, the fight was over. Like there was no like, oh, it does he have it? Does he have it? It was around the neck, fight's over. Like that's probably some really serious gripping power. I mean, it was like the Cody McKenzie thing. Like, and
Or
people
the
would be like,
Jacare
how are
was that
people?
Jacare Kamosi when he got it like insta
Yeah,
tapped him with that side choke.
exactly. At some point, if you have that kind of grip strength and squeezing and squeezing your arms, you don't have to have the best position to make it work.
And his timing was there too because he
Yeah,
got it sunk in and was already wrenching on it before Colton even really had a chance to hand fight it. So,
yeah,
all right, main card: Ellenberger versus the Moonwalker. I really enjoyed this fight. I was
yeah,
super impressed with Muntasri, even
yeah,
though they both had their imperfections and things they could have done better. But big heart on both of them. I thought this was an excellent fight, especially
hmm
considering Muntasri's debut, and he was pretty short notice for this too.
yep,
Correct?
yeah. He was just over a week, short notice.
Wow. So, and everyone was giving both these guys shit for gassing out in the end, considering the short notice and the pace that they were holding up.
Yeah.
I like the fight, hard earned win for Joe, but I like Muntasiri showing some of his, Taekwondo background in it because it was obvious that he wasn't a one-dimensional or just a Taekwondo purist. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, no, Muntasiri's a serious talent. I mean, he has all like, he could inhabit a very Darren Cruikshank like role in the UFC. Somebody who's gonna be flashy and fun, but actually skilled enough and well-rounded enough to stick around and beat some serious guys.
yeah, and I mean, I think at Black House, you're not going to come out of that camp having, really big glaring,
Yeah.
weaknesses. So to me, training with the prestige of a camp like that was really evident. That's another dude. Love to see him. Pleasantly surprised by his debut. Want to see more. Clint Hester, Antonio Braganetto. Did you think this was controversial or no?
Controversial that Hester won it, or
Yeah, and let me preface that. I was expecting Braganetto to get the second round based on his top
yeah,
control. Not that I agreed with it. So to me, if there was any controversy, I don't even know if this makes sense. It's that I expected it to be controversial, but it was not. There were some people that were LOLing and really didn't like it, but I actually preferred this round of scoring. I mean, you prioritize the most effective offense. If a guy gets
yeah,
eats a bunch of big heavy strikes, but then gets mounted, I think what really killed Braga Neto was holding that mount and not landing any strikes I mean, he really just held that mount and didn't do a lot with it.
yeah. I mean, I think how I felt about it was I may have felt like Braganetto won it watching it, but when he lost, my first thought was, well, he didn't actually do anything to win the fight. Like, I'm not sitting there looking at that decision and going, damn it, Braganetto clearly, he dropped him, he, you know, almost tapped him out, he outstruck him, something like that. Like, there was nothing that I could point to and be like, look at how much better Braganetto was than Hester in this fight. Like, and the same goes for Hester too. I mean, if Hester had lost it, I'd feel the same way. It's just like you guys both fought a pretty even fight in which Hester got handily out grappled on the ground, and Braganetto got handily outstruck on his feet. And what do you say to that? Like, both of you guys have huge glaring problems and had big successes, and neither of you really came out a clear winner.
To me, to me, it was a distinct difference is that, even though Braga Neto on the ground clearly won those exchanges, there's winning positionally,
Yeah.
which he did. And then but we've seen guys winning positionally who are throwing strikes,
Oh yeah.
looking for a rear naked choke, and he did none of that. So to not have any offense, nor really attempt, any dramatic or even memorable offense, especially while you have, this wasn't like
Yeah.
a high, not even like side control or a real like dominant half. I mean, it was full mount.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be able to do something from there. So no offense nor the attempt of any to me made Hector. That's his Latino nickname. But to me, like landing effective strikes are more important than
Yeah.
position alone. I don't know.
Yeah. And I agree with that, and I had no problem with the decision. I mean, it sucked to me to see Braga Neto lose because I think he is one of the more like bright, fun potential fighters at middleweight. But this showed pretty clearly that he needs to be able to do more than he does already.
I actually thought this fight was a little closer, maybe, than others thought. Hakron Diaz and Ricardo Llamas. Really, I was not overly impressed with Llamas in this fight. There can be a close fight that really can still be 30-27 if it's close, but one guy had the case to edge out. But I guess for some of the weird dissenting cards and split decisions we saw earlier, I thought that this one was a little closer than some of those, or a little more
I
debatable.
thought Diaz won.
Okay, well, yeah, I guess I was pussyfooting around it, but I wasn't sure. I
I
didn't
thought
watch it with
I
my
thought
judging
Diaz took
goggles. But
the first round on superior volume. I mean, Lamas landed the harder shots, but he didn't land nearly as many of them. And then Diaz out grappled and outstruck him in the second pretty damn clearly. Like the second was a very clear Diaz round. And the idea that he would drop two cards 30-27 to two judges was ridiculous. I mean, he lost the third, no question. The first round I saw as a toss up, and the second round I saw for Diaz. And the idea that two judges scored it any other way than that is totally unfathomable.
And there didn't seem to be people making a big stink about that outcome. I mean, it's not like they didn't mention it, but there
Well,
was,
I think there were a lot of people that felt that Llamas won, that felt that he took the first round. I mean, I saw that a lot on Twitter. People were like, "Oh yeah, Llamas, he was 1-1 after two was like the really con." And I was like, "What? Are you serious? Are you watching the same fight I'm watching? Because Llamas has dropped two rounds here." But a lot of people thought that Llamas won the fight, so the fact that the scorecards were totally wrong didn't bother them as much.
Yeah, and this was Texas, who doesn't have the most bulletproof reputation altogether. Anything to say on the Craig versus Ferreira fight?
No, that was an
Yeah,
ugly fight.
wasn't into that at all. Although there was one sequence where, man, what was it? I think Mut- why can't we just call him Mutante? We're not Brazilian. We don't say
Yeah.
mutant. I don't know. But he popped. He hit. I know. I think he. That's when he popped him open with that elbow, and then followed up with a helicopter takedown where he
Yep.
double legged him over the head. Pivoted, swiveled him. That was. I don't know. I guess the only thing I
That
really
was like
remember.
in the last round, Ferreira showed why he could, or or when he did that, maybe that was the second round actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was either early in the last round or the second round. Ferreira showed why he could be a very good prospect because he has all this explosive, dynamic talent that he can draw on. But then right at the end of the fight, he showed exactly why he isn't by just getting into a sloppy brawl with Craig and almost losing. I mean,
I'm giving him a minor pass because both of these guys were probably under a little pressure to pick up a win.
yeah,
Highlight of
certainly.
this fight for me was Jeff Wagenheim of Sports Illustrated tweeting me, "Can you rename your website Bloody Cornrow?" Which I don't know.
I
Wasn't
think
too
it was.
bad.
I think it was somebody I follow on Twitter constantly calling Andrew Craig Cal Brogo.
Um,
Oh, you don't
just
watch Game of Thrones? You never mind.
no, I don't know why. I've really, how, and then when something's popular and you're late coming to the party. No, let's not get into that. Gastelum and Masoki. I think Masoki's pretty good. Like I
Oh
know
yeah.
people were really down on Kelvin in that first round. Like, what the hell did he even train? And not that they're not, I mean, they're welcome to think that, but I thought like, damn, Musoki is actually a pretty talented fighter. Long,
Hmm.
good striker. Um, what I really liked from Kelvin was he started. They ended up talking about it. I think maybe it was on the Huna Marquart. My timeline's all screwed up because I watched him in backwards order. Kelvin started to slip in that left roundhouse kick right underneath Musoki's
Hmm.
elbow with frightening regularity, and that was a big thing that changed the tide for me. It was an impressive performance by Kelvin, but I think that was kind of a rough matchup because I think Musoki's tough and people don't realize that he's fairly dynamic, and they were expecting Kelvin to blow through him.
Well, there's that, and there's the fact that I like my whole thing was Musoke is tough. I knew going in that Musoke is tough and that he's a good fighter, but he's not better than Rick Story. He's just not. You know,
Or is he yet to prove that?
he's yet to prove that he's better than Rick Story, and I just don't think he is. And Gastelum put on a pretty damn good fight against Rick Story. And to see him come out against somebody who's not at that level and put out a much worse performance, and it was to start the fight, it was a notably worse performance. Early,
Exacerbated by him missing weight too, I would
yeah,
guess.
exacerbated by him missing weight, but he just looked technically regressed. His striking looked less fluid, and his footwork looked a little worse, and he just didn't look like had the same training and preparation that he'd had for his last fight, and he hadn't, quite frankly. I mean, he went to bigger camps for his last fight. He stayed home for this one.
He just came out flat, really
He
flat
just
and
came out flat
unremarkable.
and bad. And Musoke, to his credit, stayed in the fight, started strong, and as Gastelum started to pick up his rhythm late, Gastelum kind of put a beating on Musoke.
Yeah, so I think considering the weight cut in the bad first round, rounds 2 and 3 were the best he could do to
Yeah,
make up for that. But he's in a tough spot because if he doesn't figure out that weight cut thing, he does not have the frame to just move up a weight class and be as effective. So
no.
I think in a way, I don't want to say his career is in limbo, but that is to me a sticking point, something
Well,
that
he
he
needs to
really.
figure out his camp shit because it's pretty obvious that he can't stay home for a big pro fight camp. If he's gonna miss weight and he's gonna come out that flat, like the big thing that changed is your fight camp, and your performance was not better.
Yeah, and a couple strikes in the weight cut department is highly frowned upon by the
Yeah,
UFC. So all of a sudden, and it's too bad. Great prospect. He surprised a lot of people, but now he's kind of
and
digging himself a hole here.
the high side of that, all that, of course, is that he is so talented that even on a bad night, coming off a bad weight camp and not looking great, he still put a hell of a beating on Musoke for 2 rounds.
Yep, agreed. It's just, I mean, it's a thin ice, I guess. I
Yeah,
mean, the way I just look at it is, if you take away some of the things in his control that some of the negatives, he would be soaring right now.
yeah,
So, all right, let's do Cub Swanson, Jeremy Stevens. Best fight of the entire weekend.
yeah, easily. Really, and like I say, this fight made the rest of the card and it feels like I really hate that the UFC can get away with it, where it's like you have this whole card of these kind of lame decision fights that aren't much fun, but this fight just makes up for it all. And by the end of it, I'm like, that was so great. That was awesome.
It's almost like a 50-50 thing. No matter how the entire card pans out, the main event, if it blows you away, can make up, for the entire
Yeah,
show.
yeah.
Awesome fight, though, man. I mean,
Oh yeah,
to me, this was. I do think that Jeremy's right hand was a big problem for Cub, and
yeah.
like I said, Stevens is basic. He doesn't do anything. He does everything simple, but that does not take away from his efficiency. He was highly, highly effective. This was a really, really mature performance from Cub, I thought. I
Hmm.
don't even remember. Oh, it was the Marquart fight. What I thought turned it around for Cub, again, having a little bit of size and reach differential working against him. When he started pulling out that kicking game, that made a big, big difference because two observations I made, and I think the Stan, who I thought did a really good job last night, noted this too. At first, Cub was all lateral movement, so when we say footwork and movement, that can just be
Hmm.
straight lines in and out.
Yeah.
At first, Cub was all lateral, left to right, circles, pivots. When he started to get tagged, he went away from that. He was not moving laterally that much. He corrected that, and that got him out of trouble. And what I thought shifted him his way was when he started to continually using those movements, but started to work in some kicks too, because Jeremy then, just like I said before, had to compensate. He couldn't just blast him. He had to either put a fake in, a setup angle. He had to do more in order to get into his range, and that made the difference, I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, too, it sucks that I didn't hear the post fight on this of much of the post fight interviews, but I sounded pretty certain that Stevens broke his hand
Yeah, but here's what
early
was
in the fight.
trippy. I noticed in the fifth round he barely threw a right hand until
Yeah,
I think the last 20 seconds he unloaded like three of them, and I thought,
yeah.
okay, well, he doesn't give a shit. The fight's over. But then in the post fight, he said it was his left hand,
Uh,
which maybe I didn't watch. As soon as
I
once the event was over, I crashed out.
I mean,
So
either way, breaking a hand early in that fight definitely changed his offense. I think early on he was throwing combinations in the pocket with confidence and he was just sitting down on everything and he was really like, you know, he was willing to step in, close Swanson down and just unload come what may. And the truth is that his defense is good enough and his striking ability is good enough that come what may means he's going to slip most of what's coming his way and still counter and hit hard. I mean,
And he's got a
Stevens is
great chin, man.
Stevens is a much improved fighter. Like, it's hard to say. Like, it's always so hard to look at these things sort of rationally over years because this is a guy you've seen fighting for like 7 years now in the UFC. But like, he is a better fighter today than he has ever been at any point in his career.
And don't you think his game is actually, if anything, more simplified?
Could be. I mean, it's just better. It's everything's sharper. And I think I mean, it's maybe simplified. I'd say, I mean, this is what you see for a lot of fighters when they hit their prime, when they really get to be at their best, is that they stop doing excessive things. It's
And
like,
that's what I
yeah,
mean by that, by
yeah.
the way.
It's like when GSP was at, the height of his run, he was basically like a jab, a couple hooks, and a double leg. And like that was what all he was doing. Or like Jose Aldo right now. Jose Aldo's game right now is not nearly as complicated as it was when he was coming up and doing all sorts of big, exciting shit.
Yep, I agree.
And the reason is, I mean, at some point, like when you have really like technically perfected what you do well, you don't have to do a lot of other things. When you're seeing the fight well, when you're seeing what your opponent's doing well, you don't need to go. You can distill it down to the things that you want to do that really work for you.
And I think
And
that's what he's got right now is a
yeah,
package that's simple and works really well for him.
yeah, and it's great to see. But his getting breaking his hand sucked. That was a big problem. And then the other thing that I said before the fight, and it came back to bite him again. And it's just one of those like long-term things that he has that it happens and it sucks. And you can't even you can't even say something bad about it because it makes so much sense. Is that when he gets hit really hard, when he gets hurt, he just shuts down. And he shuts down for like 30 seconds.
Yeah, he comes back throwing hard though.
He
I
comes
thought
back.
last
He comes back, but he shuts down hard enough that he really gives up a big portion of visually the impact is there. You're like, oh man,
it
Jeremy
becomes a
Stevens.
memorable and tangible
Yeah,
shift in momentum. All of a sudden after
yeah,
that it was Cub. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And it's something that's just been there throughout his career. When he gets really, tagged, he has a lot of trouble regaining momentum.
So for all the times that I've talked about like just how good or important or maybe even underutilized, just a simple 1-2 or straight shots or before I don't even the Valante fight when he was going, Jeremy
Yeah.
Stevens is like a case study on how effective sharp straight punches are. And to me, that's why I believe, and this is just my perspective on his evolution. When he came in, he was a little bit more of a kickboxer, and I want to say he got taken down and armbarred by, I think that was Dean Thomas. So damn, that was a long time ago. But and then he started to play, with I'm working on my wrestling, and his wrestling, there's no question about it. I think it should be used last night a little more defensively, not solely or strictly defensively, but for the most part. But I think he's boiled everything down to, I can throw basic punches. I can throw a long, stiff jab. I can back it up with a right cross, a right overhand, and then hooks and uppercuts. That's it. I mean, it's
Yep.
almost like a basic boxing with really stable takedown defense. That's Jeremy Stevens' money. And I think even though that sounds simple, he can go a long ways. Broken hand or not, regardless, I thought his performance last night was excellent.
No,
I thought it was another step up for him.
if he's not top five in the division, he's borderline top five, and he's going to stay there for he's probably got another year or two staying there. Just I mean, with the amount of time he's already put in, you can't, like he's already been around for like 10, 11 years. It feels like.
And
I mean, he
he's a
started in
great
2005, so he's 9 years in. So sooner or later that takes its toll, but right now he's at his peak.
and there's some awesome matchups for him at
Yeah,
featherweight. I mean, Llamas, Korean Zombie, all the names,
Frankie
that we
Edgar. Watching a fight between Jeremy Stevens and Frankie Edgar right now.
Yeah, there's a ton. See, so he's an excellent person to fit in there. And
Yeah,
featherweight might be my favorite division right now. I mean, between Cub, Aldo, Llamas, all those guys. It's creative, it's fun, and they're all
yeah.
they're all exciting and explosive.
No, I mean featherweight. The top 20 of featherweight is a really fun division.
Yep, I'm digging it. So let's close with this one. I don't know how in the hell Cub Swanson cannot be in line for a title shot. I mean, some people were saying, "Oh, maybe the dude." What other top-ranked contender has 6 straight wins and they're all really solid?
Yeah, I can't even think of who else would be in line. I mean, Aldo's got to beat Chad Mendes, and if he does that, he's fought Ricardo Lamas, he's fought
Korean Zombie.
Korean Zombie, he's fought Frankie Edgar. I mean, I don't think there's anyone waiting at the top of the division for him.
Not that I'm saying this is the guy, but Nick Lentz is another guy I think maybe in the mix now. And I'm not calling him a contender or anything, but that's another guy that might be. But I'm saying that because Aldo's fought and proved
Yeah,
himself against.
and Poirier's gonna be um,
Yep.
up there. But Poirier, I mean, having lost to Cub Swanson, Swanson should be ahead of him in line.
In all those fights, you can interchange all those guys, Poirier and Stevens. I mean, those are all sick matchups that I would
Yep.
love to see. So, all right, we got to wrap this up mostly
Yep.
because I didn't plug my computer and it's going to die. And it's your birthday. I know you would love to do this all day long, but
Oh,
uh,
totally.
thanks for joining me though. I appreciate it. We got some more UFC next week. It's my birthday next Wednesday. I'm going to kind of try to get out of it, but I'm sure Zane and I will. Are you going to do the vivisection this week for
I have no idea.
175?
It depends on where Connor's at. I've been doing a lot of them, and I don't want to just hog the spotlight here. As big a prima donna as I am.
You're a sharer. You like to share. All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the show. Zane, thanks for having me. Happy birthday.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all.